is part 1 of a 5-part series on lettering large scale. Let's get into it. Number 1, my mindset. I shifted my mindset and started to believe that I could actually do this. That is going to be the most important thing that you do, because it can be intimidating to take work that is usually smaller and make it large enough for people to view at a distance. And there is a little bit more, in my opinion, imposter syndrome that comes with this kind of lettering because everybody's judging it. I've been standing on ladders for a long time and hearing guests come in. They're walking in, maybe if it's this is earlier in my career where it was taking me a long time to actually finish the installation before the wedding started, and you just hear the guests chattering and talking about your lettering, and it's like nails against a wall. You're like, oh my God, they're looking at my work. But it's very important that you think about your mindset. Now, 3 things that have impacted my mindset since I've started. Number 1, I made a chalk wall in my studio because I wanted to be able to practice without the on-site pressure and the timing that comes with it. So you want to make something that you can actually practice on at home. That's very important because you want to look at your work, you want to evaluate your work, all of those things. 2, I became a student of lettering. So I started reading about sign painters, making sure that I was observing large format work, anything that's large, anything that's on the side of a truck, anything that's in a franchise store that I like. I love Portillo's lettering style, those old-fashioned posters. I love potbellies. So I just really stand there and observe. And I'll do a whole nother series on how to observe lettering, but that's very important. And number 3 is actually standing face to face with a wall. I don't care if you have to tape a piece of paper against a wall. You want to actually start observing your lettering from that perspective. It's a big difference from sitting down and writing on these pieces of paper and writing very small, or even if you are doing some large format, like maybe you're doing some large chalkboards, acrylic, mirror, and you're laying on your belly and you're doing it off to the side. Even that is a difference from being on site. You want to start getting your body and your mind regulated to looking directly on to a piece. I know this sounds so simplistic, but it is a step that you need to take in order to be more comfortable when you're shifting your mindset to on-site, large-scale lettering, okay? Make sure you follow in for part 2. Part 2 of my 5-part lettering large-scale series. If you haven't seen the first part, go back and watch. Let's get into it. I became invested in learning different lettering styles. I didn't want to just have 1 or 2 things that I could do. I wanted to have 5 or 10 things that I could do. So what I did was I got graph paper pads and dot grid pads, and they were all about just learning lettering, mimicking lettering that I saw, making up my own lettering alphabet. I could not sketch in these pads or do any quotes or anything like that. This pad was strictly for alphabets. That's what it says on the outside, alphabets, and also styling the alphabet. So coming up with conceptual letters, all kinds of things. It's so amazing what you can come up with when you give yourself a little bit of time. So I would recommend getting a sketch pad or a dot grid pad, so anything that's going to have guides on it so that you're not having to draw lines. You don't want to have to spend time doing that. You want to already have your lines in place so that you can already do your letters. But it should be a book that is specifically dedicated to letters. That's all this book is about. Make sure you're following for part 3. Welcome to part 3 of my 5-part series on large-scale lettering. If you missed the first 2 parts, go back and watch. Let's get into it. Part 3 is all about measurements. You definitely need to get comfortable with being able to measure lines and measure large areas and know how large your lettering needs to be based on that space. A lot of times I've seen very talented letterers and their work is impeccable, but sometimes you just step back and you look at it and you're like, why did they make that so large? So I was always very conscious of how large my lettering was. Is it large enough? Is it too small? Now, this can be done through a trial and error process. However, you want to make sure, especially depending on what kind of time you have when you're designing the piece, when you're doing your proofing, you should be able to see if that lettering is large enough for that space. Large, is it too small? I would say that the proofs that I do, I usually do my proofs on an iPad or in Procreate, or I do it on an Illustrator, and I make it to size. So if the wall that I'm working on is 4 foot by 8 foot, that's the size that I make it on my proof. That I can see when I put the letters in, how do they look? Are they overwhelming this space? Are they too tiny in this space? I know this sounds elementary, but you have no idea what a problem measurements are for letterers. It's the number one thing that I get asked about. So measurements. Measurements can be kryptonite for a lot of letterers. I went to a technical high school and a drafting kit was placed in my hands at the age of 14 years old. So triangles, steel rulers, compasses, all kinds of stuff. We had to have 4 years of drafting at this technical high school. So measuring for me is a layup, but it's based on my background and when I came around, just what I learned, what was baked in the cake for me as a young person. Now it's not so much like that, and that's why you find a lot of letterers using a ton of tape, a ton of shortcuts. There is nothing better than using a level or a steel ruler to get your measurements. We'll get into it in part 4 when I talk about tools. Make sure you're following for the next part. Welcome to part 4 of my Lettering Large Scale series. If you haven't watched parts 1 through 3, go back and watch. Let's get into it. Now in part 3, I was talking about measuring, tools that you need to measure. These things give me confidence. When I go on site, the more tools that I have, the more confidence I have. Simply because additional tools, an excessive amount of tools, will give you a chance to solve more problems. I like to have my T-square. I like to have my steel rulers. I like to have my triangles. So let's get into a list of the basic tools that I think every person attempting to letter large scale should have. Number 1, I would say a level. You definitely need a level. I used to associate levels with builders. I don't know why I didn't associate it with what I wanted to do. So when I finally understood it, maybe 2018, 2017, I finally understood what a level does. A level solved a lot of problems for me. Now, a level will give you perfectly horizontal and perfectly vertical lines on site, and that's what you need. 2, triangles, all different sizes. It's a layup. You got to have triangles. Number 3, I think that you should have rulers. They will allow you to stretch out what you've already done. If the triangle is giving you a line and you're not able to go all the way to the end of your surface or all the way to the right of your surface, you can bring the ruler in. Then obviously you do need tape. There are moments when you're on site where just putting a couple of pieces of tape up is just easier and it makes more sense than actually really trying to draw some more guidelines. So you do need tape, but again, blue tape is not cheap. I do not use that blue tape liberally. You have the tape that has the measurements on it, the measuring tape. So you can stick the tape on, and it's also got the inches. Then also something to create your guidelines. I love Bistro chalk markers. I think they're the easiest to erase. Stay away from Poscas. Poscas are too strong for the guideline world. And then the Stabilo pencil, the one that writes on glass. Because I'm doing so many mirrors, so those are just something I always keep with me. As paint pens, everybody should know by now, I'm a Deco Color girl. That's the only pen I use as far as an oil-based paint pen. I've seen other people use painters and other kinds, and I can't even get those going. I don't know how they found a sweet spot with those pens. I really haven't. But again, it goes back to us all being so different in this discipline. So that's the list of the basic tools. Let me know in the comments anything that I've forgotten or anything that is just like so helpful for you, just so I'll know about it as well. Stay tuned and make sure you're following for part 5. Welcome to part 5 of my 5-part series on lettering large scale. If you missed the first 4 parts, go back and watch. Let's get into it. Now, I've talked about my personal journey, the way I shifted my mindset, the tools that I invested in, becoming a student of lettering, all of it. But now we want to talk about going to the next level, okay? Now, I just want you to know that not everything is going to work out the way you want it to when you go on site. So you're going to have to be adaptable when you get there. There are things that you're not going to be able to anticipate. The things that I couldn't anticipate when I went on site, and you won't either. Now, I've run out of time. I couldn't go with my original plan. Uncooperative pens. I've done guidelines with Posca markers that were almost impossible to erase, so it took up 30, 40 more minutes of my time. It's a lot that can happen on site. Part of being adaptable is not panicking. It's remaining calm. I always remind myself, I'm the unicorn. I'm the person that this client hired to do this job, and nobody else can do it quite like I can. I like to be imaginative when I'm on site. I like to imagine surfaces in a lot of different ways, because that way I can give them very different design solutions. When I evaluated a chalk wall here in Chicago, I was doing it for an open house. I wasn't getting paid for it. I researched every design solution, every visual that I could find on this chalkboard. And I couldn't believe that nobody thought of doing a horizontal timeline on this chalkboard. It was perfect for that. I don't know what it was in me that brought that design solution to that surface, but that is a perfect example of how only you can come up with certain things. Everybody is unique in their own special way. We hold our pens differently, and we all think about this discipline in a different way. There is room for everybody underneath this gigantic tent. Then finally, there's the epic factor, okay? How epic do you believe that you can make these surfaces? Think outside the box. Even as a beginner, all I wanted to do was make my mark. I was, and I'm still so hyped to get on site and make these surfaces special. I want guests to talk about these surfaces. I want everybody to buzz about what they're seeing, because that's what people remember. It doesn't mean you have to draw either. Clients will hire you for what you're posting and what you're positioning yourself as being able to do. The more you study letters and how they relate to each other and how they play with each other, the more your confidence will grow. I guarantee you. Also start understanding what is possible. So becoming a successful large-scale letterer takes more than just skill. It requires a shift in perspective. An adventurous spirit is not for the faint-hearted. So when done right, reimagining a structure and lettering it in a completely different way is going to be one of the most rewarding things you can do in your career. I hope you enjoyed this series as much as I enjoyed creating it. I want you to start grabbing some of your own small wins and create your own success stories inside this large scale